Hi, One Lit teacher here. Today I'm going to talk about Shakespeare's Sonnet 73, that time of year thou mayst in me behold. This, of course, is an English Shakespearean sonnet. It is a 14-line poem in iambic pentameter, which means that it has 10 syllables per line, and each line is constructed of 5 iambs. An iamb is a unit or a foot consisting of one unstressed and one stressed syllable. The rhyme scheme is AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, EF, GG, which is particular to English or Shakespearean sonnets. And the theme is established in quatrain 1, and then it further develops in quatrains 2 and 3. In this particular sonnet, the volta occurs at the couplet, so in line 13, where there is a shift in the theme and the purpose of the poem. There is a vocabulary term in line 4 that we might need to think about a little bit in order to understand the first metaphor that Shakespeare provides in the poem. Choirs, in this particular usage, would refer to the sections in churches where choirs sing. And so that's part of the metaphor. These are bare ruined choirs where late the sweet birds sang, because they are trees that are now stripped of their leaves in wintertime. Here are those structural elements marked in the poem. Again, the rhyme scheme is AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, EF, GG, 3 quatrains and a rhyming couplet. And although in a sonnet you can't see the sections separated like stanzas in another type of poem with spacing in between, if you look carefully you can see the sections of the poem. Each quatrain is made up of alternating rhyme, and Shakespeare does us a big favor in this poem and in many of his other sonnets, where he puts an end punctuation at the end of each quatrain. Within the quatrains, we have enjambment, and that means that the lines run on and the idea runs on until that end punctuation occurs. It is, of course, iambic pentameter, as I mentioned before, which is 10 syllables per line. But I wanted to point out that sometimes people read poems differently, and there are probably some people who see line 8 a little bit differently. This could be possibly a spondee at the beginning of line 8, which means 2 accented syllables, and then the pattern of iambs falls back into place. If you want to read it like that, death's second self, that steals up all in rest, that might be a layer of the poem where the theme about time and the age of the speaker becomes a little bit more serious because he is ever creeping towards death. But I like to think of it as iambic pentameter. There are places in Shakespeare's sonnets where the iambic pentameter is not necessarily perfect, but we know that it's what he intended because all sonnets are written in iambic pentameter. In this particular poem, the use of metaphor is very heavy, and Shakespeare actually uses a series of 3 metaphors. Here I have separated those sections as if they were separate stanzas so that we can talk about them a little bit more easily. In the opening quatrain, Shakespeare provides the first extended metaphor connecting his age to time and seasons. This first extended metaphor is larger in scale than those that follow. It's an extended metaphor because it runs through more than one line of the poem. And this is a fairly typical metaphor where people measure their age in terms of the seasons of the year. That time of year thou mayst in me behold, when yellow leaves, or none, or few, do hang upon those boughs which shake against the cold, bare-ruined choirs, where late the sweet birds sang. And you can also kind of hear that enjambment as you keep going, waiting to take your breath at the end of the quatrain where the period occurs. In quatrain 2, he offers another metaphor, and this time he shortens the time frame to 1 day. So this is significantly shorter than the year that he presents as the measure of time in quatrain 1. In me thou seest the twilight of such day, as after sunset fadeth in the west, which by and by black night doth take away death's second self, that seals up all in rest. So you can see the time frame closing in. It's pretty ingenious. Shakespeare is demonstrating how his own life is shortening and sort of speeding towards his death as he grows older. In quatrain 3, he offers another extended metaphor, shortening the time frame yet again, this time to the duration of a fire. Again, from a day in quatrain 2 and a whole year in quatrain 1, so you can see the time frame closing in. In me thou seest the glowing of such fire that on the ashes of his youth doth lie, as the deathbed whereon it must expire, consumed with that which it was nourished by. And then in the couplet, there is a distinct change. This occurs at line 13 with the volta. Shakespeare turns to creating an argument here about how and why love is stronger when time is short. This thou perceivest, which makes thy love more strong, to love that well which thou must leave ere long. So we have little time left, and that idea makes the concept of love stronger. Here I am showing how I came to these conclusions about the poem. First, I started with nature imagery and a color motif because discovering these ideas in the poem provided me the first clues about the extended metaphors. So I have marked nature imagery, yellow leaves, the boughs of the tree, which are shaking in the cold. They are bare ruined choirs, which is a smaller metaphor in itself, where sweet birds sang. Twilight is also an element of nature. Sunset, fire, and ashes are elements of nature. And then I've marked the color motif, and I was a little bit liberal with the use of the idea here of color because we have yellow and black, but I also included twilight and sunset and glowing as visual color elements in the poem that help with the time changes in the poem. And then I moved on to look at the figurative language, which really makes the extended metaphor sort of pop out. So there is a simile in quatrain 2, as if sunset fadeth in the west. So this is the twilight of the day that he says the young man should see in him as if sunset is fading in the west, a metaphor. A simile. And then smaller metaphor at the end of quatrain 2, death's second self, which is night. And again, the idea that night and death are similar is constant in a lot of Renaissance literature. In me thou seest the glowing of such fire that on the ashes of his youth doth lie, is another metaphor. But you can see that these metaphors in each quatrain easily extend to the point where we can call them extended metaphors, and I have them marked on a later screen. There's also a paradox at the end of quatrain 3. This fire consumed with that which it was nourished by. This is a paradox, and Shakespeare is making it similar to the way that end of life occurs for people. It is consumed with that which it was nourished by. And here are some more markings I've extended with my color key here. Shakespeare is creating the idea of competing against time with a time motif and some subtle sound devices. So not only does the time frame start off a year and then move to a day and then to the duration of a fire, but he also creates some momentum in the poem with a time motif. So words like time, year, late, twilight, sunset fadeth in the west, night again, and must expire, must leave ere long, sort of also point out the sort of snowballing effect of time. There's also an example of polysyndeton in line 2, and this I think also helps with the momentum of the time element in the poem. This is where Shakespeare has connected ideas with conjunctions. He could easily just have commas, but, well, he needs these ors to keep the meter intact, and also it has the effect of speeding the momentum of the line. That time of year thou mayst in me behold, when yellow leaves, or none, or few, do hang upon those boughs. So that polysyndeton, or none, or few, helps with the momentum. And there are some important repetitions that I think also do the same. They speed the momentum of the poem. So, which by and by black night doth take away. And then the idea of love in the couplet is less about the time element as it is about the conclusion of the argument that love is more precious and stronger in the end of life. There is some anaphora that also aids with, again, the momentum. In me thou seest the twilight of such day. In me thou seest the glowing of such fire. And anaphora is, again, that special kind of repetition where a word or phrase begins multiple lines. There is some alliteration and consonance in the poem, and I think the most significant use of that is with the S sound, which we could also call sibilance. And interestingly, it comes in where Shakespeare is talking about the sun fading in quatrain 2 and then the fire burning itself out in quatrain 3. And so it sort of contributes to that burning idea of the fire, perhaps the sound of a fire, and we get the idea that it is burning itself out. I have also marked the volta in green with a green circle here. This thou perceivest, which makes thy love more strong, to love that well, which thou must leave ere long. And you can also hear that alliteration of the L's slowing the line in the couplet when I read it out loud. So in Sonnet 73, Shakespeare acknowledges the universal experience of aging and offers advice about strengthening the bonds of love we share with those who are in the later stages of life. And I think this is a beautiful poem, and it's a nice reminder that ideas like aging and impending death are universal, and no matter what time period or place that people live in, we all have to deal with our own aging and the aging of people that we love. If you enjoyed this sonnet explication, this explanation, then I hope you will subscribe to my YouTube channel, One Lit Teacher, and hear about some other Shakespeare sonnets, about how to color mark a poem, about how to determine meter in poetry, and also some lessons on other great poets and works of literature. Thank you.